I wanted to make a video today talking about the state of Western gaming because right now I'm very disappointed with where it's at, and I think a lot of other players are kind of reaching the same realization. You can see that a lot with what's popular on Steam right now. Most of the games that are popular on Steam are coming from game studios that aren't even based in the United States or Britain or France or these other areas that are considered the West, right? Larian Studios, Embark Studios, Eastern titles. So you have your Sony games, your Final Fantasies, your gotcha games, right? Like all of these things are currently taking over our market, and there's a good reason for that. It's not just coming out of nowhere. It's not propaganda. It's because they're better. A good example would be Where Winds Meet, which just recently came out, and a lot of people seem to be really liking it. I haven't had a chance to play it yet, but I've heard some really good things, and it seems that the reason it's so popular is because they listen to players, and there's a lot of things to do, and there's a very player-first focused gameplay experience. One of the biggest problems I have with Western games, especially ones from the big publishers right now, is there seems to be an ideology that isn't currently focused on the player. It's focused on the bottom line, on investors and making money. For example, we've seen the enshittification of Call of Duty handled by Activision year over year since probably about 2014 or 15. There have been some standout titles. Call of Duty 2019 was fairly decent, I would say, but it wasn't like the best by any means. But overall, the decline of Call of Duty has been kind of a trend that seems to have followed with the fall of the AAA industry in the West. So, Call of Duty Black Ops 7, which just released recently, you might have heard about it because of how bad the campaign is. I mean, it has a freaking zombie boss fight at the end. It's not even a military shooter anymore. Like, what happened? That game sold about 70% less than last year's game, and last year's game sold less than the year before. So no longer are we even like competing with ourselves anymore. These companies are just like, or are they competing with themselves anymore? These companies are just in free fall right now. And the people in charge seem to be completely in denial about it. The Borderlands 4 CEO or head director or whatever literally said that their game was for premium players and that if you couldn't run the game, it wasn't made for you. And I think that's a really bad mentality to have when even the people that have the best hardware aren't getting the performance they want in your game. And it really hinders the game. The game honestly was pretty decent, but the performance issues are awful. And from what I've heard from some friends that still play the game, most of them haven't been fixed yet, which I think is a big problem. You can also see this with games like Dragon Age the Veilguard, which suffered from a terribly written story, clunky mechanics, and overall a downgrade from Dragon Age the Inquisition, which I think was a very, very good RPG for the time it came out. These people go on Twitter and they blame market conditions, they blame other game releases, they blame releases like Hollow Knight Silksong for drowning out their game, and they blame the player. They're like, this is your fault. You are the problem, and that is a issue. Like, why are we, as a company whose job it is to make games for the player, telling the player it's their fault they didn't want to buy the game? If the player isn't buying the game, it's because they don't want it. That's the bottom line. And I think overall this is a big issue because when you start getting these echo chambers of executives, developers, and people that don't really see players as players and they see them as ways to make money, you start getting bad products, you start getting games less as an art form and more as a cash grab, and you start kind of falling into this free fall where nobody really wants to buy your games anymore. And when you start blaming people that are doing good, for example, when Baldur's Gate 3 came out and everyone said we can't live up to this quality, then a year later, 2 years later, Expedition 33 came out and everyone said we can't live up to this quality, this isn't fair. And then in the same year we had Hollow Knight Silksong come out at a cheap price of like $20 and everyone go, you can't price your game like that, it's hurting us. It starts to kind of paint a picture for what the industry has become. These people don't want to make good games, they want to make money. And that is the problem currently with Western games. And it's not just Activision that's having this problem. You can look at Ubisoft, you can look at EA. EA just had to get bought out by a private group of business conglomerates because they can't hang anymore. To be honest with you, that's what it is. Ubisoft's stock is down to almost the lowest point or the lowest point it's been in years. Also because of the same reasons. Rushed games, cash grabs, mismanagement of their IPs, it's all basically the same across the board. Kind of continuing on that train, in opposite, as we've seen, the East is starting to kind of take over the video game market. From Software has been putting out consistently good or unique projects for a very long time. Whether they are always the best quality is up to opinion, but for the most part, they put a lot of effort into experimentation, game testing, and making meaningful games, right? We had games like Escape from Duckov, which is a Chinese game, which was also written off by the West and Western games media as being only popular because of China, be massive in the United States, especially as a single player extraction shooter, which I think is a massive achievement, right? We've also, in recent time, actually, about as I'm making this video, I haven't played it yet, but Where Winds Meet is a brand new free to play RPG made from an Eastern studio. And to my knowledge, it's an RPG with an open world and seems to be absolutely exploding right now. Everyone's playing it. A lot of people are playing it. I shouldn't say everybody. And they seem to be enjoying it. The reviews are mostly positive. I am aware that it's free to play and it does have, in my opinion, some questionable microtransactions, like very expensive outfits, but apparently you can earn them in game for free, so I don't really have a problem with that. And also, in Europe, we've seen a similar thing. Once again, I'm going to mention Expedition 33 here. The game released at $50, I believe, and was monumentally better than almost anything that's come out in the last 5 years. I don't like turn-based games mostly. I've never really played one before, but that game hooked me like in a way that no other game really has. And once again, Western media and AAA game studios tried to kind of throw it under the bus. For example, a lot of companies or journalist companies posted articles saying that the game didn't have enough diversity, right? And I think that once again shows an issue with the industry. They don't care that the game was a love letter to French culture. They care that it didn't fit their ideas and values and that it did better than what they could create, and also that it was priced less. Because what it means is that it threatens their bottom line, because no longer are these $70 Xbox pushing for $80 games seemingly worth it to players. They don't want to buy them. They don't want it. Another thing that, on the topic of Expedition 33, that I think is also an issue with the industry is they didn't even get a nomination for the Grammys for the game soundtrack category. They got beat out by Star Wars Outlaws, Avatar, and Helldivers 2, among other things like Indiana Jones. And while I think that these composers do deserve credit, the fact that this game itself was not nominated, mostly because it's not in the group of people that kind of run the Grammys and have influence, astounds me. The game spent 10 weeks on the Billboard 100 for classical music, if I remember correctly, like the soundtrack. And honestly, it's a good soundtrack. All the songs in it are well made. I would consider it a masterpiece and a very memorable piece of work. And I do not think that Avatar or Star Wars Outlaws deserve to be ahead of it in that regard. The fact that it didn't even get a nomination says something about the industry as a whole. These people don't want to include people that challenge their ideas and beliefs. They don't want to include games like Hollow Knight Silksong in these arguments because to them, Hollow Knight Silksong is a threat. A game that is as good as it is, reaching as many players as it has, for as cheap as it is not something that is in the interest of the shareholders. And that's a massive problem, I think. And I think what's going to happen is we're going to see a massive shift in the coming years from consumers buying these products to consumers buying indie titles and buying Eastern titles, which is what we've already seen. I think that the problem here isn't even necessarily with the marketing model. The problem is they're dipping too deep. For example, if I'm buying a game for $50, $60, $70, $80, I should not have to pay for microtransactions in that title because your cost is fronted by the $70 price tag. It used to be this way a long time ago, and somewhere along the lines, companies were like, wait, if I make a $60 game and then I charge you for every little thing in it, you'll still buy it. So, like FIFA, NBA are big examples of this. It's a $60, $70 game filled with microtransactions, and they're double dipping on both fronts. And I think that's a really bad thing. So, the other end of the spectrum is free to play games. This is a little bit harder, obviously, because the game is free. You have to recoup your cost over time through the player. So, for example, if I made a $60 game with no microtransactions, and then I had like 100,000 people buy it for $60, that's like six. All right. Anyway, I'm gonna skip there. So, if I had, for example, a $60 game and I wanted to make $60 off every player that buys it, I can just make $60 off the initial sale, right? If I have a free-to-play title, for example, and I want to make $60 off every player, you need to have incentives. You need to have passes, microtransactions, and you need them to be incentivized because you need to have an average return of $60 or more per player to make that game profitable for its development cost. What I think is a really good idea that we've seen a lot of studios do is a lot of these indie titles, $20, $30, $40 games, release at $20 or $30, and then they release with a few DLCs on top to make up for that recoup in price from being a lower price game. Or, for example, what Arc Raiders has done, I think is really smart, is you price your game at $40, right? At $40, you make most of the money back off the players. It gives you a really good cushion to continue developing the game, and it gives you more options and microtransactions because you don't necessarily have to push everything. You can have a shop that isn't in your face, like what they've done. The skin shop is not in your face, it's not required, and it's fairly fair, right? Everything is like $10, $15. You don't have to buy it if you want to, and if you decide to, for the most part, it doesn't feel like you had to, it's just because you wanted it. And I think that a lot of the AAA game industry, all these like massive publishing companies, seem to have lost the idea of a fair pricing model. They seem to kind of be stuck in this loop where they want to double dip on everything. They want a $70, $80 game. They want to fill it with microtransactions. They want you'd have to buy passes yearly. Hell, Microsoft is literally trying to sell you a subscription to play their games at this point. Like, you have to have Game Pass because it's included in Gold now, I'm pretty sure, to play a lot of games online. And it's just disgusting to me. Like, I think that these publishers are very soon, if they haven't already, going to be feeling the fact that they're kind of losing the faith of the consumer. And we're going to see indie titles just explode as we have this year and the last few years. Friend swap games, I think, are a massive indicator of this, where they're these cheap games you only have to buy for a few bucks, and you can have fun with your friends for a little bit and then put it down and never have to think about it again. For example, you could buy like 4 friend swap games, one like mid-level title like Silksong, and like probably 3 or 4 other small games for the price of one AAA title. Like, think about that for a minute. And what's crazy about it is that you're not gonna spend as much time on these games as you might on like a AAA title, but sometimes you might. So for Hollow Knight Silksong, for example, you might spend 60 to 100 hours in that for $20 versus buying an Xbox title for like 70, playing it for like 10 hours, realizing it's dog shit, and then putting it down, right? That's kind of where I'm at with this. Honestly, that's my take on it. And if you guys have any kind of ideas on it, any thoughts, leave them in the comments below. This is more of a ranty, less structured video because it's just something that I'm passionate about and I really just want to see improve. So y'all have a good day. Stay frosty.